going to incrementally improve as a passer, but ultimately his bones are going to be made by running that football and moving those chains and scaring the living hell out of defenses because he's such an electrifying athlete. That's how I view him.
Yeah, I don't really have any concerns about Lamar Jackson when it comes to the playoffs. Now, is it a conversation? Absolutely. I mean, he was so good the back end of his first season and then last year that we are now going to put him in a very kind of small box with, we don't really, we want to watch what you do in the regular season because you're amazing, but now it's going to be about how you perform in the postseason. That's how good the beginning of his career has been. I want to go back to last year because we do need to put context on that game against the Tennessee Titans. And we've talked about it a little bit. You guys have both mentioned it. But first of all, they went down 14-0. The Ravens went down 14-0 within like a quarter. That team, style-wise, is not built to play from behind. They are built to get up 7-0 or 10-3 and just allow that explosive offense and run game to pound you away. So them going down 14-0 had nothing to do with Lamar. Their first drive of the game, they go right down the field, and he hits Mark Andrews with the ball. Not a great throw, but it goes off his hands, intercepted. Second of all, they had 4 drops. Like that obviously is a big deal in any game, let alone the playoffs. Mark Ingram was hurt. He was coming off that calf injury, so their run game was subpar. And then Derrick Henry had like 200 yards rushing. So they did not lose that playoff game because of Lamar Jackson. They lost that playoff game because of all the people and pieces around Lamar Jackson. So that's why I don't have concerns about him. Also, this team, this organization drafts and develops very well. I mean, this is one of the few teams in the NFL organization-wise that you can know year in and year out. Since their inception, they've been a really good organization. So he's going to have so many opportunities. It's also important to point out, like, Peyton Manning and Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, they didn't win their first playoff game until their 6th season. Lamar just had his first year as a starter. And so I have zero concerns. I actually think, Max, him admitting that they were somewhat looking ahead, I think it's a great sign of maturity. It's a great sign of development for him to be able to be like, you know what, that was a learning process for me.
It was, but the reason I use that as evidence for why I am concerned, again, I think he can do it. I think he will do it. But I am concerned is that what it indicates is that the psychological circumstances really have an effect on him. He's admitting it. Maybe they have an effect on everyone. He's admitting it. But what happens if next year also there's a bump in the road, a teammate drops the ball, something happens, they run into a juggernaut, whatever happens, and he doesn't win in the playoffs again. And now it's Lamar, like the stories get bigger and bigger. And they affect, it's not just him, it's a team sport. It's also his teammates. Now, he is so young that those things can be addressed. But so far, and you're right, he didn't, as I mentioned off the top, he didn't play that bad in this last playoffs, not like the first one. And even in that game, he got better quickly in the second half. It was amazing for a 21 or 22-year-old at the time. So it's not so much that he can't do it or that it's all on him. It's that it becomes a story. And then how does it affect him? Because what we can say is he's not as good as he's normally been in the playoffs so far. And he needs to elevate to lead his team.
And that's kind of why I said, like, the regular season.
You've got Miles Brown, you've got Boykin, you've got Mark Andrews and people like that. I mean, they've got some quality players, but there's no superstar definitive one individual to rely upon. He is that guy. And so if you're the Baltimore Ravens, you're going to have to make sure he has the requisite assistance necessary. If you look at their draft, if you look at some of the people they've added in the offseason, you see a team that recognizes the fact that they dropped the ball defensively, and they're determined not to make sure that they get smacked around this time the way that they did last time against the Tennessee Titans. Because Dan is right. The 4 drops, yes, but more importantly, they went into a 14-0 hole, and that's not how they're built. But in the end, let's face reality. We don't expect Lamar Jackson to be as good as Patrick Mahomes throwing the football. We don't even expect him to be as good as Deshaun Watson throwing the football. And so when you look at it from that perspective, what are you expecting from him? To move the chains, to scare the living hell out of defenses, to make sure you compromise defenses by having people to stay home and spy on him because of his ability to run the football. We also got to pay attention to Mark Ingram and what you're going to get out of him as well. All of those things are question marks. And the fact that you have those question marks about so many things involving the Baltimore Ravens literally means taking some of the heat off of him. We expect Baltimore to be in the postseason. We expect them to be one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the AFC. If they don't, then you've come up short. But I don't think anybody expects that from them.
Stephen A. and Dan, if it's not, my point is this, and I know it's a different sport and it's not the same thing, but like James Harden is still an all-star in the playoffs, but he's an MVP in the regular season. And the reason his team hasn't won a championship is when they've needed him to be an MVP in the playoffs, he hasn't been. So Lamar Jackson's an MVP in the regular season. He has to be more sometimes than an all-star in the playoffs if his teammates need that kind of leadership. He needs to do, and so that's where I start to not say he can't do it or he won't do it, but are my antenna up a little bit? They are. I'm concerned.
Yeah, but Harden has been in the NBA for a decade, and Lamar Jackson is in his third season.
Sure.
And that's why it's fair that it's a conversation. But there's no evidence. Like if he had a poor performance this past year, we're probably having a little different vantage point, and that's why it's fair that it's a conversation. I would say this: the question for me with Lamar Jackson is not will he perform in the playoffs. It's when you're not at your best, which what he was not individually and their football team against the Titans last year. When you're not at your best, can you still find a way to do something above all means to win that game? Because that's what the great quarterbacks do. When they have their C game, or they need to go score 40 against somebody because their defense stinks, or they do have the 4 or 5 drops. Are you good enough? Are you great enough to overcome all that stuff? And that's when you enter a different conversation. And that's what probably the one thing I'll look at Lamar back into the season, into the playoffs next year.
That's fair. And I'll just wrap with this. I know he didn't play his best, but Lamar Jackson did produce over 500 total yards in that loss to the Titans. That was the highest output by any quarterback in the whole playoffs. So it's not like he was a deer in headlights like that earlier year against the San Diego Chargers. No, I understand. Dan,
he was no Jimmy Garoppolo.
Oh, you love your boy Jimmy G.
Why you got to throw that shot in there, man? Why you got to throw that shot?
Chipped up.
Position, which I think, coupled with his natural athletic ability and the weapons he has around him, makes him an absolute, like every year, the favorite to be the MVP for the foreseeable future, despite the fact that his numbers may not be blowing away everyone else's. And that's not to take away anything from Aaron Rodgers, who you could tell early on this season, despite him saying, hey, look, I am going to help Jordan Love out as much as I can, relative to what I need to do myself here to get us to play winning football. But make no mistake about it, this is a guy who is on a mission. He is a guy who has a lot to prove. He hears all the talk about could he be turning down. You saw him reference that in that Pat McAfee interview. This is a guy who very much so still has a lot of his edge. And depending upon how he finishes up this season, I would not be surprised to see him make a strong run for MVP. But Patrick is just on I think I've run out of superlatives really to talk about his play at such a young age, and it's still at the infant levels as far as his career is concerned. But this young man is just different, man. He just is, and it's not hype. You're seeing him prove it week after week. And Stephen A., some of those numbers you pointed out as far as the number of 400-yard games and how consistently he is just putting up numbers after number after number. I don't care what weapons he has. We're in for a treat for a long time.